Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. We're talking with my buddy Vince on developing leaders and hiring practices. Two great topics. How do we develop leaders? How do we create that in our church? And then what are some hiring processes when the opportunity comes to add to our staff? So it's a great conversation. Hey, I want to encourage you to check out churchboom.org. We have executive coaching there. If you're at a point where you need that one-on-one coaching, your team needs a special coach just for you, it's not group coaching, it's one-on-one, check out churchboom.org and check out the executive coaching. You can fill out a little inquiry form and we'll reach out to you and set up a call and talk to you a little bit about how we can help you with executive coaching. Hey, let's jump into today's call. I think it's going to be a great one for you. Well, man, awesome to be able to hang out with you today. And how can I serve you, man? What's on your mind?
Well, I have several questions, and one of those is leadership, raising up leaders. It's one of my goals for this year. We've gotten a lot of traction with our church, and raising up leaders is where I'm looking to kind of leverage for the 2025 and improve my skills and make that happen as good as I can. So the question is, when raising up leaders, how do we know when our investment in a particular leader is paying off, and how do we navigate that conversation if they are off track with the vision, and how do I lead them in different options of ministry?
Yeah. Well, a couple thoughts for you. Let's back up just a little bit.
Sure.
Do you have a system or a process by which you guys are currently developing leaders at the church?
So we've been kind of applying a lot of the things from Church Boom with the pipeline, and kind of giving them smaller tasks and trying to get them into leadership, and more of managing, raising up leaders in different ministries. Particularly, this is a youth leader that I'm trying to cultivate. But there just seems some misalignment, and I do want to invest in. I will continue to invest, but when do you know when it's time to pull the plug, or how do you navigate that?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. Well, let me tell you, when I'm apprenticing someone in the leadership ladder that Church Boom provides, we kind of look at it kind of a 6 to 12 month process of the apprenticing, and somewhere in that 6-month process, if I don't feel like it's gaining any traction, if I don't feel like it's going anywhere, I figure out a way. Obviously, I don't want to hurt anybody, but I figure out a way to not really invest in them anymore. Sure. If I recognize that even earlier, where I made a mistake, and I was like, why did I even start doing this? Because it clearly isn't there. Then I'm going to pull back even earlier if I need to. If you're not getting, if you don't see the results, you don't want to put in the time. You don't want to plow in a field that's not going to give you a harvest.
Sure.
And so,
I've already had this experience one time where I've invested in a person for a really long time and kind of regretted it. And so it gives you kind of some insight to see it happening again. And so, but I have a little more, I've had a few different successes with raising up leaders, but at the same time, that makes a lot of sense.
Well, let me ask you this question. So this is the second time that's happened, which I get. I mean, we all do that. For you personally, is there anything you've learned where you look at and go, okay, I won't do that again, or apparently I'm making a mistake here, or I'm seeing this, or I'm not seeing this. Where do you think the mistake lies for you?
Well, I mean, I know that I have limited resources, and I want to bring the best out of everybody I can. And I know best is a difficult place, it's a difficult thing to define sometimes when you're limited. But at the same time, I want to be able to use as much, bring the best out of as many people as I can at the level they're capable of leading at.
Yeah.
And so those are just some thoughts that I was just wrestling with.
Yeah. Do you think, and again, I'm not saying that you're doing this, so just something to keep in mind. I think sometimes as leaders and our heart and spirit is in that faith, Christ followers, sort of, we believe in people, God's got a call on everyone, God's got a,
Right.
that kind of thing. And we have a tendency, something I always say is we sometimes have a tendency of instead of bringing out of people what God put in them, we try to put in them what we think God left out. We see you're called to be a leader, and the reality is they're just not.
Right.
They're not called to lead at that level. They're not
Right.
there. First, maybe they're not there spiritually. They're not there emotionally. They're not there in whatever, or they're just not called to lead at that level. That's just not who they are. We're trying to pump them up and do something that's just not who they are. So I'm not saying you're doing that, but I know I've made that mistake. Where I tend to that guy's you can do it. And I step back and go, I'm thinking, he doesn't want to do it. I don't think God's called him to do it, but I'm over there acting like it's,
For sure. Yeah. I think the Christian part of me wants them to succeed, but the reality of it is it's just going to create more, it's going to hijack my time and alienate all my other leaders. And so I got to weigh that in the balance and try to figure out how I can make the best out of the situation.
Yeah. And since we're on the subject of developing leaders, make sure that your team is following that pipeline or ladder where, man, is everybody developing a leader?
Right.
I always say everybody should be developing and everybody should be replacing. In other words, do I have one worship leader or do I have three? Do I have one children's pastor or do I have three? I always say this, it's kind of a funny thing, but most churches are one pneumonia away from a disaster. So the children's pastor get pneumonia. What are we going to do? The worship pastor gets pneumonia. What are we going to do? Yeah. Well, if we would take some time to develop these people, we might not fall into that problem.
Yeah. And I feel like we're on our way with that, having multiple layers of leaders so that when something goes wrong, and I think that's what's kind of motivating me to make 2025 my mission to better myself as a person who can raise up leaders and teach people to raise up leaders as well. So
good. Well, cool. What else you got on your mind today?
So I have here in question number 2, we have implemented a lot of the structures and practices that, through going Church Boom, the talking about that and reading the book. Sometimes it feels a little difficult to keep it all moving forward. Is there any priorities that I need to focus on and making sure that I have certain things in place to keep everything going and making sure I'm heading in the right direction?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot, growing a church is a lot. You develop leaders, you got to deal with this, you got that, you're building teams, you're handling all this stuff. As the church grows, I don't know if you've ever seen the exercise that we do in Church Boom called Mission Critical, but the sentence in Mission Critical is what I think is the crucial sentence. If Vince doesn't do blank, our future is threatened. Now you got to answer the question, what's the blank? I don't know what that is for you. I know if you're not making team development with your leaders and your team a priority, that's a major deal. If you're not figuring out how to create greater generosity, work with high-level donors, create greater income so you can have greater resources, that's a big deal. If you're not casting vision and keeping it in front of people and moving people and learning how to cast vision, that's a big deal. If you're not the chief communicator of the team, that's a big deal. So there's 3 or 4 things that become a big deal.
Yeah.
In the Mission Critical, the idea is you have 3 or 4 big rocks, if you will, and 70% of your time should go to those big rocks. And we talk about that a lot. So I think you have to fill in the blank. If Vince doesn't do blank, our future's threatened. You got to figure that out.
Yeah, and I think that Mission Critical thing is what's motivated me to build leaders, because that's in a sense where we're at right now in this whole process is raising up leaders. But I had a little bit of fear, you kind of have a little bit of PTSD to so I'm kind of letting go of some things, I guess probably for other leaders to do, to focus on things that need to be done. But again, I guess it's just hard to wrap your mind around because there are a lot of things. But at the same time, I do want to focus on what's mission critical and what's important for me to do. Sometimes it just makes me a little nervous.
Well, let's talk about that. What is the key component that makes you nervous, if you're just being honest?
I think that what makes me nervous is that, so I've been through this process in different ways before, at least trying to do it. I haven't been successful, but I'm finding finally some success and traction with our church and building the structure. The structure was huge about having mission and vision and the core values, and finding my own identity was huge pieces. And I don't want to lose that. I don't want to make sure that the structure and all that stuff stays in place. Right. And then that would enable me to kind of move on and start building in a different, that there's something else that I haven't gotten to, like, investing in the leaders more so I can create more leaders to kind of, support the vision and the mission and all that stuff. And I guess it's all going to pan out as long as it's really me having patience and kind of being able to kind of keep that vision and mission before the, it's not like I'm constantly working. I'm just kind of keeping my eye on it to make sure it's not falling apart.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I don't, what's the size of your church right now? How many people go to your church on average Sunday?
About 120.
Okay. So at this size, you're at that point where you're going to have to start. Every church grows to the level of the pastor's personality. So once you get past that personality, then you've got to start looking at processes and systems. Right now, you're at a point where in that mission critical, we talk about eliminating and delegating. So you have to eliminate, what things do I need to not do at all? And no one needs to be doing them. We don't need to do that anymore. That was fine when we were 40 people. We're not 40 people anymore. So let's get rid of all that. Then delegating is, I need to give away this. I need to give away this. I got to train someone up, give it away. Train someone up, give it away. That's an enormous part, because here's what's going to happen, Vince. There's a difference between lid and capacity.
Sure.
Lid is what we put on ourselves. Capacity is what God does for us. So we end up hitting a lid in the church and we say, well, maybe I'm 150 pastor, kind of a pastor. Like, well, maybe you're 300, but you put the lid on it. You put the lid on it by maybe being a little nervous to give authority away, or maybe nervous to give that thing away, or maybe perfectionism gets in the way. It's like, I'm the only one that can do it right. And whatever it is, we put lids on. God creates the capacity. He decides 5 talent, 2 talent, 1 talent. We're the ones that creates the lid. And we have to know, are we creating lids by not giving authority away, by not eliminating this and delegating this? And then there's all, I think that's a big part. So lid and capacity are different. You have to keep that in mind. Some people that are like, if I don't do it right, then it won't get done. Look, there's a lot of things that if you could get it done at a 10 and someone gets it done at an 8, let them have it. There's just a lot of things like, that's good enough. That's fine for what it is. Now, I'm going to speak the messages. That can't just be good enough. I'm the one that's going to cast the vision. That can't be just good enough. I'm going to develop leaders. That can't be just good enough. But that, and that, a 7 or 8 is just fine. And because it's going to allow me to focus over here. Always remember, Vince, you don't get to add hours. You only get to trade them. And so you have to trade your hours for what is more important. It's so important to do that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of been part of my struggle, and I'm getting it, is just to have to do it incrementally, because I can't get ahead of myself and give up everything. I still recognize there's things I got to do, but at the same, maybe even do some things I don't want to do, and the people, I can't just hand it off to nowhere or nobody that is not trained, and so that I think it's just part of me being patient to allow the structure or the people to rise up to be able to hand that off, which is why I think that leader development is going to be key for me for this year.
Yeah.
Just to help hand off some of these things that I don't need to be doing.
Well, I think that, and if you can start that, I would encourage you on the develop the leaders, start it, do it. And then get your teams to start doing it too. The worship leader should be doing it. The children's director should be doing it. Everybody should be doing that. It shouldn't just be an initiative for a year. It should be the culture of your church. We develop leaders, period.
Sure.
So that people can reach their potential and we can get more done. You got more leaders, you'll get more done. You'll get to 200, you get to 300, you'll add a second site, you'll go multi-site. Whatever God has you to do, you're going to find that a lot easier if you have a depth of leadership bench. Mm-hmm. But if your leadership bench is one level, that's a major problem. And you're going to have a hard time continuing to grow.
Yeah.
So anyway, what else you got on your mind today?
So this is kind of going into that whole situation with how, what are the important things to know about hiring people, the next steps? What are some of the indicators that kind of give us some green flags to say, okay, now we need to start looking into this, or that type of.
Are you talking about when to hire someone or the kind of people to hire?
Well, I know that obviously we want to hire some people that will fit into the whole thing, and that's probably another question. But yeah, when is, and it's kind of like my experience has been kind of like in faith, and it's a lot of times you hire. I mean, do you wait for the money to show up, or do we wait for the people? So there's like a secret balance that needs to take place where you can start either thinking about. I mean, I'm always thinking about hiring somebody, but having the funds and all the resources to make it happen is another thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think there are times when what we say is hire to the future. It's kind of like we can't 100% afford it right now, but I believe that this person will help us grow and it will show up.
Sure.
I think I believe with all my heart, you have to, if you're going to step out in that faith, you got to believe that person's not just going to relieve you of work, but and pressure or whatever, which is important. I'm not minimizing that, but they're going to help grow this thing.
Sure.
And the bigger you get, it doesn't change. If you've got 2 employees or you've got 25 employees, when do we hire the next one? When can we afford it? When is the right time? I think sometimes it just easily fits into the budget, and there are times where you're hiring towards the future.
Sure.
But when you're hiring towards the future, it's a risk. Because if it doesn't pay off, and if you're like, well, we've got a lot of cash reserves and it'll really stretch us, but I think they'll make a difference in 6 to 12 months. Well, 6 to 12 months comes and goes, and it really hasn't made a difference. Now what do you do? So you find yourself in a tough spot. So that's why I tell people, it's got to fit inside of the budget, but there are times when you hire to the future, but not all the time. You can't do that all the time. It's got to mainly fit in the budget. But if you hire to the future, you got to know that they're going to deliver. Now, to prepare your board for hiring to the future, this is, and I don't know what cash reserves you have, whatever, all that. Let's say you've got some cash reserves and you could lean on that a little bit, whatever. There's 2 things. One is what is the calculated risk? And then secondly, what's the acceptable loss? Calculated risk, acceptable loss. So calculated risk is, hey, we're going to risk it. It's calculated. We believe in 6 to 12 months it'll make up. We've really thought it through. It's not just throwing caution to the wind. We've calculated the risk. Now the second one is the acceptable loss. We're okay if we are still, bleeding at $1,200 a month because we got cash reserves for 6 months or for 9 months. But at some point, it's not an acceptable loss anymore.
Sure.
So someone might say, man, our acceptable loss is $10,000. Our acceptable loss is $100,000. Depends on the size of the church, size of the money they have. But you have to have an acceptable loss. Like, what is okay to lose? And then be okay with it when you're losing it. But once you hit it, it's like, okay, now we got to make a decision. Because that now starts putting boundaries and milestones into this decision that you're making.
Sure. Yeah, you can't just walk into it without a lot of thought. You have a strategy and a purpose for that person, and you can't figure it out as you go. Kind of thing.
No. You need to have a calculated risk, an acceptable loss, if you're going to make the step, what's called hiring to the future. You may be hiring to the future, but you got to have an acceptable loss, a calculated risk, acceptable loss. If you're hiring to the future, if it fits in your budget, it fits in your budget. I will say, when you start thinking about those things, the one thing, I don't know if you're part of Church Boom University or not, but
Yes.
Okay, so you should be getting a book in the mail if you haven't already,
Yes.
called Who Not How. That book is really transformational, because Who Not How is all about, hey man, make sure you get the right who's on your team. And if your vision and goal isn't that big, then you don't need the right who's on your team. You can do it yourself. But if your vision is like, okay, this is big, then you got to go after people that are quality. And everything is about getting the top couple people around you. One thing I always say, whether the church is 100 or the church is 1,000, I always say, man, show me the top 2 or 3 people on that team, and you can probably predict how far it's going to go.
Right.
Because it's not just you, it's the top 2 or 3 people around you. Get high, not just good people, not just faithful people, not nice people, not Christian people, not character people, like all that stuff. We all know that's important. And the one thing I always say is get the best people you can, but here's the thing, hire leaders.
Yeah.
People often we're hiring a children's pastor because everybody loves Miss Sue. They think she's the greatest lady in the world. She is. She doesn't know how to lead. She doesn't know how to develop people. She doesn't know how to build teams. But for the 25 kids we have, they all love her. And that might be fine for there. That's not fine for here. If you want to go up, you're going to need something. You're going to need to hire leaders. I even get to a point where I tell people, I just told a guy this earlier this week. I did a big coaching thing with a bunch of lead pastors. They all flew in and we spent the day together. And I said to one of them, I said, look, at the end of the day, hire the leader. Well, hire the leader for the youth. And if they never speak in front of the youth, I don't care. Do they know how to build teams? Andy Stanley once told me, he says, man, my youth pastor is not the greatest communicator in the world, but I didn't hire him for that. I hired him to build a team that will do an amazing work. So he raised up preachers, he raised up worship teams, he raised up leaders. And that's what you're going for. Everybody always thinks, I just got to find a guy that, it's like, well, possibly you just need to find an amazing leader. Yes. Find amazing leaders, and this thing will go to 200 to 300 very quickly. But the book, Who Not How, will really help you a lot.
So one of the things that I kind of been doing is in-house leadership, and haven't been looking outside of, outside resources.
Yeah.
Is there a balance to that, or can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. Well, if you have a culture of developing leaders, then you'll find hiring in will be a lot easier. If you don't have a system and a culture of developing leaders, then you're going to find that a lot more difficult. I am a big fan of hiring in. I'm working with a church right now that in a matter of a handful of years went from 200 to almost pushing 2,000. And they've got 22 people on their staff. Not one is from the outside.
See, that's encouraging, because that's kind of what I envision for what we're doing. We're hiring in-house and then kind of giving them our DNA and our vision as we're developing relationships with them and building them and who they are going to be. And so I think hire the leader, it seems to be obvious just by rubbing shoulders with people. They seem to just come out. Yep. They just seem to appear in a sense, a lot of ways.
Well, develop a system with all of your team where they are developing leaders, they are apprenticing leaders, just like we talk about in the leadership ladder and through Church Boom University and all that. Where they're developing. If you start creating that, then picking out leaders is not going to be that hard. But if you don't have that, then you're going to be forced to hire from the outside or forced to hire a low level leader, and you don't want that. Raise leaders up and then pick the best ones. Raise them up and then pick the best ones. Sure. And because it will dictate the growth of your church and the speed and how far the church goes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I know that there's a lot of different levels of growth in a church, and what's a good indicator that we're on track? That's kind of like the highs. I mean, I know that you just said a church grew to 2,000 really quickly.
Yeah.
What is the average or the expectation of, yearly growth that should keep us, confident that we're hitting the mark.
Yeah. I don't know if there's a magic number, but I do strongly suggest and for people to work towards that everything is up and to the right.
Yes.
If we're talking, 8 to 12% increase in our giving, 8 to 12% increase in our attendance, 8 to 12%, and if you can find that 10% right in that realm, I think that's kind of healthy and moving. Now I will, but with this caveat, I think when you're smaller, the percentage should be higher.
Yeah.
When you get bigger, the percentage comes down. You say 10% of going from 100. Well, you're going from 100 to 110. That's 10 people. It's like got
Right.
12 months to get 10 people. I think the percentages should be higher. When you get up to 3,000 and you got to add 300 more people to your church, that's a little harder to do. So I think the percentages when you're smaller should be higher.
So yeah, we've been able to, I think it's around 40% is what we've done for, so we went from 50 we were 50 for a really long time, and now we're, hoping to hit about 150 before the year is over. So
that's great.
So
how long ago were you 50?
Well, it's been 2 years, probably a little more. This will be the third year, I think, for this year, or we're going into the third year.
That's great.
And I think we're on track. I mean, there's so much that's just changed with Church Boom and having the resources available through the university and just having cohorts that are going through the same system. It's just been very beneficial on so many different levels.
That's awesome. I love it. Love hearing that. Well, if you've gone 2.5 years from 50 to 120, that's a good growth. Keep pushing.
Sure.
Be 150 by the end of the year. But I think you're going up. But everything should be up and to the right. Sure. Giving, attendance, everything's up and to the right. Bigger you get, the percentages get more difficult. But everything should be up and to the right, for sure. Yeah. Well, man, it's so awesome to hang out with you. I got to jump on the next one, but man, it's so cool to hang out with you. And I am so thrilled to hear about your involvement with Church Boom University, your involvement with a coaching cohort group. You are a guy that's seeing the resources and taking advantage of them, and it's paying off. And man, I tell people all the time, he's like signing up at a gym. If you sign up at a gym, but you don't never show up, it's not going to put you in shape, right. And it's like, here's all the resources, but if you don't apply them, then what's the point? But you're applying them, Vince, and it's obviously paying off big time. So that's awesome, man. Way to go. Keep up the amazing work.
Yep. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good day, my friend.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye. Hey, thanks for jumping on today's call with my buddy Vince. Hope you enjoyed the conversation on developing leaders and hiring practices, such a crucial part of building a church. Also want to remind you to check out churchboom.org if you've ever thought about executive coaching. Maybe this is the time for you. All you got to do is just click there. You can fill out a little form, and we'll reach out to you. And executive coaching is basically coaching for you and possibly your team. It's very much one-on-one, and it works. I have a coach. I've had one for years, and I believe in coaching. So if you've ever thought about it, go to churchboom.org and click the tab that says executive coaching, and we look forward to talking to you about that. And we will see you next time on the Fly on the Wall podcast.